History is all around us. There are secrets of our past around every corner, hidden in our streets, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'm going to be uncovering those secrets by exploring Britain's most historic towns. That sent shivers down my spine. Yeah. That's amazing. I want to find out which towns across the UK can reveal the most about each period in British history. Let's go. I'll be deciphering clues in familiar landscapes, bringing lost landmarks back to life, and turning back the clock to reveal how these towns looked at key stages in their history.
You shouldn't be in here, should you?
From the Plantagenets to the Edwardians, the Civil War to the Second World War, I'll reveal the story of an era through the story of a single town. Today I'm in the British town whose tale is entwined with the story of World War II like no other.
2,226 shells fell on this small town.
It was in the front line of German attack from the sea and the skies. A town where a seemingly impossible evacuation of an entire army was planned and launched.
It was so dangerous to be out there.
Its great white cliffs symbolising our island's defiance and resourcefulness.
Get out of the way!
It's a town that embodied the indomitable spirit of Britain. To fully understand British life on the front line in the war against Hitler, the best place to come is Dover. Dover today is an unassuming town on the southeast coast, home to just over 30,000 people. But look closely at the architecture around the town centre, and you'll see its grand Georgian and Victorian buildings are randomly interrupted by 50s civic architecture. The unmistakable signs of the heroic part Dover played in the front line in Britain's battles during the Second World War. But then Dover has always been our first line of defence. With just 21 miles of English Channel in between, it's Britain's closest point to the European mainland. Convenient for hopping on a ferry to France today, but also very handy for repelling potential invaders.
Section to action! Fuse 20!
The Romans, the Normans and Napoleon all attacked or threatened Dover.
Dogs in range, go on!
It's no wonder Dover was known as the lock and key to the kingdom. This gun dates from the First World War, when Dover was crucial to the British naval fleet, and its quayside was the stepping-off point for millions of young men as they went off to fight the war, to end all wars. Tragically, that wouldn't be the case, and 21 years later, Europe was engulfed in war again, and Dover would be centre stage in Britain's struggle to survive and then repel Nazi invasion. By May 1940, the German army seemed utterly invincible. Hitler's unstoppable war machine had stormed across Belgium and France, encircling 500,000 bedraggled Allied soldiers on the beaches at Dunkirk.
B-Stelle an der Küste beobachtet die Flucht der feindlichen Flotte. Englische Zerstörer versuchen, die fliehenden Transporter zu decken. Deutsche Flak ist schnell zur Stelle.
It seemed inevitable that our army and all its equipment would be lost, and following that, Britain itself would surely fall. A desperate Churchill entrusted his old friend, Admiral Bertram Ramsay, to come up with a plan to extract as many of those British troops as possible. It would be called Operation Dynamo, but of course, it's better known simply as Dunkirk. And it was down here in the warren of ancient tunnels that run out from under Dover Castle towards the White Cliffs that Ramsay formulated the most audacious rescue plan in modern warfare. I'm down here to meet author and historian Joshua Levine. Josh.
Hello, Alice.
Hello.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, really nice to meet you.
Follow me, and then turn right here. These were Admiral Ramsay's private quarters. This is where he slept at the time of Dunkirk. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then through here is the famous balcony where Ramsay stood.
Yeah.
Look, that is France
Yeah.
out there. I mean,
You can see it clearly
it's
today.
amazing, isn't it? And in fact, there's a picture of Ramsay on this balcony. And it's so moving because this is what he would have seen as he was trying, basically, to bring the entire British Army back.
I mean, it's a crazy plan.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point is he was a very organised man. You know, he was the sort of guy that you would turn to in a crisis.
Yeah.
And this absolutely was a crisis.
Ramsay held his first Dunkirk planning meeting on the 20th of May 1940. Just 6 days later, he was amassing a flotilla of nearly 1,000 rescue craft, from naval destroyers to the famous small fishing boats, many of these owned by Dover townspeople.
A lot of fishermen from Dover went across. They were able to take their boats very quickly. And then a few private boat owners, so Captain Lightoller, who was the senior surviving officer from the Titanic, obviously hadn't had enough danger in his life and jumped in his own boat and took it across. But for the most part, these boats were requisitioned and taken over by ratings and naval officers.
This ill-equipped flotilla was sailing into the full deadly force of the most powerful army in the world, heading to beaches where 500,000 stranded soldiers were being slaughtered. Ramsay fully expected almost total annihilation unless he and his officers at Dunkirk found a way of getting soldiers off the beaches faster. Aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson is heading over the channel to get a wider perspective on this utterly desperate situation.
We're just approaching Dunkirk. The marvellous thing about flying at this height is that we're still connected with the landscape beneath us. I've got the beaches stretching out before me. Everyone down there would be a sitting duck to be machine gunned, to be bombed. It's impossible to disguise them, they are so vulnerable. That's my first glimpse of the famous East Mole, that narrow breakwater stretching out from the port. And it's along that mole that the troops filed to wait to board the ships that were berthed against it. Now, it's a breakwater. It's not intended as a dock. But a senior naval officer had the brilliant idea that you could berth ships alongside it and men would just have to jump. You couldn't tie them up, they'd just have to jump onto the decks. To think that that narrow strip of land, crammed with troops, all patiently waiting, all being strafed and bombed and shelled from the shore, you couldn't imagine a more precarious situation. The British Army, stuck in this small pocket, dependent on getting off the beaches and back to England, just 20 odd miles away. But to actually get there is another matter.
Over 9 days, a steady stream of merchant and navy ships made their way to Dover from Dunkirk. Admiral Ramsay had planned 3 different routes, X, Y, and Z, each with different pros and cons. Route Z was the shortest, but it meant hugging the French coast and being targeted by the German guns on shore. Route X was safe from shore fire, but travelled through a heavily mined part of the channel, and nearby sandbanks meant it couldn't be used at night. The longest route was Y, the safest nautical path, but took at least 4 hours, during which ships would be vulnerable to fierce German firepower from sea and air. 3 routes negotiating an obstacle course from hell,
all with one goal: Dover.
So Josh, tell me what it would have been like looking out at this scene during those 9 days.
You had a calm sea for virtually, not all the time, but virtually the whole time. And you also had quite a bit of cloud cover.
Did they know the weather was going to be okay?
It was absolute pure luck. And you've got to remember, even with that, there was still so much danger out there. You had submarines, you had motor torpedo boats. A lot of the ships were bombed by Stuka dive bombers that would dive vertically out of the sky, making this wailing sound. If a ship was hit, some people would be killed and a lot of people would just be tossed into the water. So other ships coming along would have to pick up those people. Now, the ships would have been, you know, stuffed to the gills in the first place, and they'd now be taking on even more people.
Yeah. How many ships would have been coming in here then to Dover?
Well, you'd have had huge numbers of ships, up to 60 a day. And the sight would have been, I mean, it would have been heartrending. Many of them were wounded. Many of them hadn't eaten for days. And they would be amazed by the reaction that they were getting from a lot of the volunteers here at Dover, because this was their first inkling that something had changed in the mood in Britain, that there was this thing called Dunkirk spirit that was taking off organically, and people would have been celebrating them as returning heroes.
Hitler thought he'd won a victory here.
Hitler had won a victory. I mean, the fact was that the Allies had lost the Battle of France, but the fact that they had managed to get away meant that they grabbed almost a victory out of defeat.
It's a quite powerful symbol of hope, isn't it?
A combination of good weather and the incredible effectiveness of the mole helped avert what both Churchill and Ramsay thought would be our greatest ever national tragedy. And in fact, they'd only dared to hope that 30,000 of the 500,000 soldiers stranded at Dunkirk would be rescued. Instead, an army had been brought home to Dover.
They called it a miracle, as miracle indeed it was. Instead of the expected few, over 300,000 men had been lifted from Dunkirk to the shores of Britain.
The Miracle of Dunkirk provided a huge boost to the nation's morale. However, when Churchill addressed the House of Commons on the 4th of June 1940, he sought to calm the euphoria.
Sir, we must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuation.
And he went on to accurately predict what was to happen next.
The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Next, I'm going to try to understand the incredible pressure faced by the young women coordinating Britain's air defence against German aerial bombardment.
Northwest, whiskey, Ray 4.
World War II created tales of heroism, courage, and tragic loss in towns all across Britain. But it was Dover that encapsulated the spirit of a nation as it resisted Hitler's awesome military machine. The people of Dover had already played a leading role in the Dunkirk evacuation, but the town barely had time to draw breath before it played a crucial role in a desperate defence of Britain once again. Just a few weeks after Hitler let the British army slip through his fingers at Dunkirk, he embarked on the next phase of his plan to conquer Europe. He wanted to bring Britain to its knees, to force us to surrender. The greatest air battle the world had ever seen was about to take place in the skies over Dover. Hitler planned to use Germany's vastly superior air power to destroy the RAF, leaving Britain far more vulnerable to invasion. But Britain was not about to give up without a fight. Our top-secret air defence network linked radar technology and military observers to processing stations that sent information incredibly quickly to fighter squadrons, scrambling them within minutes of a sighting. And the Luftwaffe had no idea that this network existed. At the heart of this air defence system were the plotters, the women auxiliaries who updated information through a constantly changing display of the Luftwaffe's waves of attack. I've come to meet military researcher Rowena Willard-Wright, who recreated this air defence control room in Dover Castle's tunnels.
This would have been one of the busiest gun operations rooms in the country.
How does it work?
So you'd start off with being told that whether that information was something someone's seen or whether they've heard it, so visual or heard. After that, you'd be told which part of the board it is in. In this case, whiskey, so the W, so you're on this side of the board.
Yeah.
Whiskey, and now we get down to the block. The first block at the top is the raid number. Let's say it's raid number 1. If you look at the sector clock up there, a blue block indicates that the raid came in when the big hand was on the blue triangle.
So you've only got 15 minutes worth of information at any one time?
Yeah, because anything longer than that, the plane's long gone. The next one is how many are in that raid. And let's say it's about 25, so you'd put in 20 plus.
Okay.
Finally, the last piece of information is the height. And you knew that was coming because they said angels. Let's say it's 20,000 feet and you take this block.
So I'd hear angels 20
Yeah.
and I'd take 20 and put it in that lowest slot.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there you are, you've done it.
Ah, there's so many pieces of information.
I'm only going to do this once with one block, but during the Battle of Britain, women worked with up to 3 or 4 blocks simultaneously, with the war taking place above their heads. It must have been stressful and terrifying.
Just clip that on there. To make this more realistic, Rowena is not going to stand right next to me issuing the commands. She's going to be right over there. And I'm going to listen to her voice through these headphones.
Let's see how fast we can go with this.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
Visuals. Northwest, whiskey. 3456. H, raid 4. 3, angels 20. That's it. Well done.
Yes. Standing up for 8 hours
yeah.
and really focusing, really concentrating, and it is so vital that they get it right.
Yes.
Those young women who plotted out the course of the Luftwaffe helped RAF fighters intercept up to 3/4 of all German bomber raids. Many of them were from the Auxiliary Territorial Service, or ATS, a service close to my heart.
I think the Second World War to me feels like history which is just starting to slip from our grasp. It's so close and yet so far away. Many people my age will have parents who were perhaps born during the war and grandparents who lived through it. And here's a picture of my paternal grandmother, my grandma. As a young woman in her ATS uniform, she worked in Whitehall. She must be half the age I am now. And I wonder how I would have coped with the stress and the strain and the fear of those wartime years. The skies over Dover today are so serene and peaceful that it's incredibly hard to imagine what it must have been like in that summer of 1940, when the residents of Dover could have looked up to see wave after wave of German bombers flying over them, intent on destruction. Ben Robinson is retracing the flight of one of those German bombing missions to Hawkinge airfield, just 10 miles from Dover.
As a German airman now, if I'm approaching, I see those white cliffs with a sinking feeling. I know that everything is going to be thrown at me. There's machine guns down there if I try and go in at low level. There are big anti-aircraft guns if I try and go up higher. The actual shells don't have to hit me at all. They burst near me, sending red-hot shards of shrapnel through the air at huge speeds. Now, these days, Hawkinge is very well disguised because a housing development has been built over the airfield itself, but the site of the hangars and administrative buildings are still there. I can see aircraft on the ground. My objective is to try and knock out those aircraft. We know that the Luftwaffe bombarded this airfield time and time again. Hawkinge was a key part of our defences. Straight over the top. Bombs gone. Have we got a mic? I hope Alice is sheltering down there.
Despite the barrage, many bombers made it through, causing heavy damage at bases such as this at Hawkinge.
If bases like Hawkinge were destroyed, it would have left Britain completely open to intensive and unchecked blitzkrieg bombing that Hitler hoped would bring Britain to its knees. But after 3.5 months of intense aerial combat, Britain held firm. The RAF lost 544 airmen, while the Luftwaffe losses were over 2,500.
The dogged resistance in the skies over Dover and across Britain meant that the biggest air battle in history was over. And it's down to the bravery of the RAF, the ATS and many, many others that Britain's defence stood strong.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
But there were hundreds of casualties, both military and civilian, and these following on so soon after the ordeal of Dunkirk meant doctors and surgeons in Dover especially were being severely tested. The remarkable Gertrude Tolland was a surgeon working in Dover throughout the war, treating the injured, both British and German, and I'm meeting her son, Gordon.
Hello.
Very good to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you
Yes.
too. And wonderful to be here to talk about your mum, actually. Your mother must have treated hundreds of airmen and soldiers here in Dover during the war.
That's true. The airmen in particular during the Battle of Britain and soldiers during the Dunkirk evacuation. They were taken to Buckland Hospital, where there were 2 operating tables in a basement bunker.
Just two
operating tables operating day and night. And then, obviously, throughout the war, aircraft were shot down, and so there'd be airmen to deal with on both sides.
Yeah.
In this box, I have a bullet and some shrapnel, which my mother removed from the behind of a German airman.
Really?
Yes.
That's a bullet?
That's a bullet, and the other 2 bits are shrapnel, probably from the poor man's airplane.
And presumably that's a bullet coming from a British
Spitfire
fighter.
or a Hurricane,
Yeah,
yes.
and then this is bits of the German airplane that have ended up in his buttock.
Yes.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And did he survive?
Yes, I think he did survive.
Yeah.
I think he was wounded in the buttock, is a good place to be wounded in.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of blood vessels there.
There are, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's just extraordinary. Evidence of your mum's competence as a surgeon.
Yes.
What an astonishing woman. And she was one of the heroes of the Second World War.
Well, thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Next, I'm going to find out how a chronic shortage of food would threaten our country with starvation and lead to long-lasting changes for both farming and women's roles in society. I'm in Dover to discover what it was like for a British town on the front line during World War II. From July to October 1940, Hitler's attempt to subjugate Britain by air had been thwarted by British and Allied pilots in the Battle of Britain. But the Luftwaffe's blitz of cities and industry was intensifying. The bombing was horrific, but it was arguably the Battle of the Atlantic that was having an even bigger impact on the lives of most ordinary Brits. In the 1930s, Britain was importing about 70% of its food from abroad. And then war broke out, and we had German U-boats inflicting heavy damage on shipping, so that many basic foodstuffs ended up being in very short supply. The country needed to become much more self-sufficient, and it needed to do that very quickly. With men away at war, there was a severe shortage of agricultural labour. Lack of crops could have led to mass starvation. Britain's women would have to step into the breach. Enter the Land Girl Army. This is the site of Hadlow Farm just outside Dover, where from 1939, land girls would have been drafted.
I've come to learn to plough, just as I would have done as a newly drafted land girl. I've got the outfit back in 1940, and Bernard's going to teach me. Hello, Bernard.
Hello.
Hello. So is this the kind of kit that I would have been using as a land girl?
Absolutely.
I've driven a tractor once or twice before, can't remember much about it. I've never ploughed. Shall I hop up there?
You do indeed need to hop up there.
Yeah. Right, so I'm going to let my foot up and give this a good tug. There's a pace, there's a pace.
We'll move that then.
This is such a beast. I kind of want to look behind me at what's going on with the plough, but I'm worried if I look behind, I'll veer off.
By 1944, the Women's Land Army was over 80,000 strong.
Is it working?
Yes.
You're in my way! Get out of the way!
Let go, let go. Yeah, well done.
Now what?
And now you need to turn. Go that way a bit. Otherwise you won't have room. She's doing very well, she really is. She's got a nice straight line.
What do I give for a bit of power steering?
No such thing,
oh
I'm
my
afraid.
goodness, she's a beast to turn, isn't she?
It is.
As I'm getting the hang of this, I'm keen to try out an even bigger machine. It's a vintage TD-18, a huge tractor with lever steering and tracks like a tank. Before the war, women would rarely have been allowed near machinery like this. Land girls were conscripted quickly, so the lives of tens of thousands of young women would have completely changed overnight. To find out just how big that change was, I'm meeting Dr. Juliet Pattinson.
That's fantastic. Feeling actually ridiculously proud of myself at this moment. Look at that incredibly straight furrow.
Second career beckons.
If I was a young woman from Dover and I was conscripted and became a land girl, where could I have ended up?
So you could have ended up anywhere in the country because you're a single woman. So you don't have any ties. You could be conscripted anywhere. You were mobile.
And did married women become land girls? Because I am a married woman with 2 children, so presumably my husband would be away at war somewhere.
So yeah, married and older women were the last kind of cohort to be conscripted. So it starts with single women aged 20 to 30, and then it broadens out. So first it would be married women without children, and then eventually it was married women with children over 14, and then finally in 1944, under 14.
Everyone.
Yeah, essentially.
Vital farm work was one of many roles being taken on by women. They were doing almost every job in civilian life, from driving ambulances to making the trains run on time. The training and pay that came with the new roles was changing life for women fundamentally. They had been given the opportunity to resist and question the Victorian idea that a woman's place was only in the home.
And that's not to say family is not important, of course it is. But I think we've got a much better balance and we've got much better opportunities today.
because of those pioneering wartime women. The effort to save the country from starvation didn't stop with the introduction of the Land Girl Army. All available land, including gardens and parkland, was turned over to allotments as the population was encouraged to grow vegetables of national importance.
Vegetables are all very well, but meat, fish, sugar, butter, cheese, cream, things which sound perhaps essential, were becoming luxuries under rationing. So cooks had to become ever more creative in what had become known as the kitchen front.
I've come to an allotment on the outskirts of Dover. Many like this were created during World War II. I'm meeting Seren Charrington-Hollins, an expert in World War II creative cuisine.
Seren, hi.
Oh, hi.
Hello, hello. What's under the blanket?
Well, I have an absolute feast for you here, mock goose.
Looks like hay to me.
Well, this is a hay box cooker, and the idea is that this insulates the food. So I start off by cooking it in a pudding basin, getting some heat into it, and then transferring it into here to slow cook it.
So is that to save on fuel?
It is, yes, yeah.
So this is called mock goose. It doesn't look very goose-like.
But it's got the apples, it's got the sage, which is kind of reminiscent of what you might have with goose.
No, I thoroughly approve of that. That's nice, I like that.
Well, you may not like the next thing I'm going to give you.
That looks disgusting.
This is all about using leftovers up and also using what's available in the store cupboard. You've got peas, you've got parsnips, you've got some potato in there, a bit of swede, and then a mashed up tin of corned beef.
Honestly,
Yes.
honestly. Do you like it? Have you tried it? You must have tried it.
No, my husband tells me it's very nice.
He likes it, doesn't
Yeah, I feed him most of these things.
That's just mean.
You may want to wash it down with some mock orange juice.
What's that made of? It's sweet juice, isn't it?
It is.
Here goes. Cheers. That's okay.
Germany's attempt to starve Britain into submission by targeting the merchant navy took a terrible toll. By the end of the war, Britain had lost over half of her merchant fleet. We really did have to rely on garden produce to survive, and root vegetables played a starring role.
So what we have is a nice syrup sponge with a little bit of grated swede to help with the sweetness.
What's the thing with swedes? So I don't think I've ever had a swede sponge before.
Yeah,
but I like carrot cake. I don't think I can even taste swede in it, actually.
No, it's just grated up very, very fine.
I think I could go back in time to the 1940s and be quite happy with this. I think it's ingenious, but just imagine what a joy it must have been when you could discard the ration book.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, and then we go from being very much about frugal and economy to just frivolous cooking.
The ingenuity of Britain's cooks and the tireless efforts of the Land Girl Army all helped Britain avoid starvation. But it was a really close shave. So close that in 1947 a new Agriculture Act was passed, ensuring that Britain would never again be vulnerable to starvation in the same way. Food shortages were just one of the many hardships faced by the people of wartime Dover, and the town's proximity to France would put it directly in the firing line.
I'm about to find out why this area became known as Hell's Corner.
I've experienced the vital roles played by people in Dover during the evacuation of Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain. But the toughest times were still to come. The town's proximity to occupied France meant that it was thrust deep into the heat of a vicious battle.
In 1940, Churchill, on one of his many visits to Dover, looked out across the channel and spotted a group of passing ships. And he apparently asked, "Which of our Royal Navy vessels are those?" And an officer sheepishly replied, "I'm afraid those are German ships." A furious Churchill demanded action.
New gun batteries were urgently built north of Dover to police the straits and keep German shipping out. And just yards away from the White Cliffs, tunnels were dug to house the men who permanently manned the guns. Even today, looking from above, the entrances are hard to spot. I'm going to make a descent into history, and my guide to these rather dark and cramped living quarters is Trevor Wiltshire.
Quite strange, it's like an Anderson shelter but at 45 degrees. So when was this dug out then, Trevor?
November 40 to the start of 41.
And who dug it?
172 tunnelling group, 100 days to dig it all out.
How many men would have been down here?
About 200 men here and 2 officers as well. And here is a drawing of the area.
Oh, from the time?
Yes,
Yeah.
from the time. It's exactly as you see it in front of you here.
Oh, so that edge there, that corner, is the corner we're looking at
Exactly,
just
that's it.
here?
And you can see there's a chap changing the light bulbs, there's rifles there, there's bunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we go any further? Can we?
Yes, please
into
do,
the
yes.
tunnel?
You walk down this way. And of course we've got graffiti on the wall as well. There we are, 1940, so writing 1942.
And we're coming down to the toilets
We're coming
down
down towards the toilet area, there we are. This is where the people would have waited for the toilet.
Oh yeah, here's some writing. So this brick's obviously been replaced upside down.
Upside
This
down,
is recent,
yes.
isn't it?
Yes,
It's
that's
been
right,
repaired.
yes.
But it's legible. When you come into this hall, use the paper, not this wall. If no paper can be found, run your something, there's a lump of cement there, blotting out the word. I
Luckily,
suspect
yes,
it's
yes.
something along the lines of bombs along the ground. Dreadful. Oh, well, it kept them
Well,
amused.
you know, it's historic, you see.
And they stayed down here the whole time? They were living down here then?
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
And these guns were manned round the clock?
Oh, yes, war was 24/7, not a 9 till 5 job.
Oh, it's quite a relief to emerge back into the sunshine. But for the men down there during the war, well, they were safe while they were in the tunnels, but they had to come out into the open air to operate the guns. And the first of the gun emplacements was right here.
These 6-inch naval guns had a range of just 14 miles, only enough to keep enemy shipping away from Dover. But behind them were 2 huge 15-inch guns, which had the range to reach the French coast and targets beyond. Ben's looking for the marks our guns left in the landscape as they tried to take out the huge German guns across the channel.
Below me, I can see traces of this dreadful duel. Everywhere I see the ground that is slightly rough, is disused, anywhere where there's a trace of concrete, I know something was going on there. That's the site of the great German gun batteries, and you can see how the landscape is pockmarked with these shells, the intensity of the shelling. The Germans would bring up guns on railways. Again, these guns could fire 20 miles across the channel and hit Dover. Must have been utterly terrifying to be living with the expectation that a shell launched from these batteries could hit you at any moment.
In 4 years, over 2,000 German shells fell right here, devastating this small town.
The damage from this shelling, as well as regular bombing, meant the destruction of Dover was widespread and profound. Over 200 people died and 10,000 buildings were damaged. No wonder this area earned the unfortunate nickname, Hell's Corner.
You know, there are clues here, but quite often the clues are absences. So if we look at this building here, then that would have been a lovely terrace, a crescent, that would have continued around here. And it's gone, it's been obliterated. And it's these gaps and changes in architecture in Dover today which stand as testament to the constant threat, the terror that the people of Dover had to live with throughout those war years.
For 1,510 days, the Nazi big guns across the Channel were free to pump 16-inch shells into Dover and neighboring towns.
Terry Sutton was 10 years old at the start of the war, and though evacuated, returned every holiday and saw the damage.
You must be Terry.
Hello, Alice.
Hello.
You don't mind me not getting up, do
No,
you?
don't. You stay there. I want to...
Well, you meet us in the centre of Dover, the centre of our town.
So this was within range of the German shell?
There were 2,226 shells fell on this small town.
People must have died.
Lots of people died in Dover. Just up the road there, one Sunday afternoon, at about midday, there was no air raid warning at all, and young girls, young ATS girls and young Wrens, Navy girls, were walking down there with their boyfriends, and suddenly a shell landed there and killed at least 10.
No.
I mean, how unlucky was that?
Yeah, I think, these horrendous stories, what that really brings home to me is the bravery of people back here in Britain. Yes, the bravery of troops going over to France, fighting over there, including my grandfather landing on the beaches at D-Day. But the people back here in Dover and the people that stayed, with all that loss of life happening around them.
Well, I think people gradually got used to it. I mean, you knew if you didn't go out shopping, you didn't get the food.
As the residents of Dover and other British towns held firm in the face of German onslaught, on the continent, the tide was beginning to turn.
Over in the east, Hitler's armies were in retreat, pushed back by the Russians. Meanwhile, in Britain, preparations were being made to attack across the Channel and open up a western front. The whole plan was codenamed Operation Overlord, and it would start with D-Day itself.
But for D-Day to be a success, the Allies had to draw German attention away from the build-up of forces around Southampton and the landing beaches in Normandy. And only one British town could serve as a plausible decoy. Historian Joshua Levine knows all about this ambitious campaign of deception to make the Nazis believe the invasion was coming from Dover.
So what do they actually do here at Dover? The real troops aren't here. How can they pretend that the attack is going to come from Dover?
Well, what they've got to do initially is to try and make it physically look as if there are lots of troops and troop camps and tanks and landing craft and all sorts of things here. And the best way to do that is, well, you can do it a number of ways. First of all, they built dummy tanks, so inflatable tanks, inflatable trucks, and they basically just sort of placed them around.
As well as this rather ingenious use of inflatables, the Allies also led the Germans astray using double agents.
And these people were sending misinformation, and all of this built up bit by bit by bit. And the reason was, the thing to do was to try and get the Germans to work it out for themselves.
Yeah.
Because if you give them the full story...
They'll think it's too easy.
Exactly.
Did it work?
The amazing thing is that it did work.
They trusted that intelligence, and it was fake news.
It was fake news. There's nothing new.
Boarding ship for the Battle of Normandy. The army group carrying out the assault is made up of British, Canadian and American forces.
With Dover acting as the perfect decoy, the Allied attack launched on the 6th of June 1944, which will always be remembered as D-Day.
Operation Overlord was the greatest seaborne invasion in military history, and by most measures it was a huge success. The Allied troops swept along and then up the coast of northern France into the Pas de Calais, capturing those guns that had caused so much damage to Dover by September 1944. But it would be 8 more months of bitter fighting until Hitler was dead and the Allies could claim the victory.
In the decades after the war, Dover was rebuilt, and it would go on to become Europe's busiest ferry port.
Walking around Dover today, there are relatively few clues to the drama that played out here during those war years. And yet the town itself, and of course those iconic white cliffs, stand as powerful symbols of resistance, of the struggle against Nazi Germany.
This is a town that played a vital role in the Dunkirk evacuation. A town whose guns never gave up their fight against Hitler's deadly arsenal. And a town bearing the scars of war, but representing an incredible spirit of resistance and survival.
And that's why Dover is Britain's most wartime town.